Eleanor Marston never expected her life to change at 65. She believed everything that could break her had already broken her decades ago. She had already buried her parents, tended to two siblings who moved far away and seldom called, and lived through the crushing grief of losing her husband just 3 years after their wedding. After that, life became a long, quiet hallway she walked through without purpose or expectation. Her small Oregon home suited her loneliness. Weathered wood, quiet garden, and a narrow porch overlooking fir trees that whispered in the autumn winds. She had routines, and she clung to them because they protected her from thoughts she didn't want to revisit. But everything changed the day she opened the cedar trunk. It sat untouched at the back of her bedroom closet, covered with a quilt she had stitched in her 20s. She had not opened it in nearly 40 years. She had no reason to. The trunk held remnants of a different life, a version of herself she no longer recognized. But that morning, something compelled her to open it. Perhaps it was the dream she had, the one where Henry stood across a river, calling her name, but his voice was swallowed by the rushing water. Or perhaps it was simply time. She pulled the trunk forward and the scent of old cedar rose as she lifted the lid. Inside were objects she had forgotten, her wedding veil, pale and delicate, their honeymoon photograph in Italy, a faded shirt Henry used to wear when fixing the garden fence, and at the bottom, wrapped in linen, a small pouch containing his watch. Her fingers hesitated before touching the watch. She expected a wave of sorrow to wash over her, but instead, she felt a faint tremble beneath her hand. As though something inside the trunk shifted. Something she hadn't placed there. She pressed her hand against the base of the trunk. The wood felt uneven. She lifted the lining slowly, peeling it back from the corner. And then she saw it. An envelope tucked under the lining, yellowed with age but sealed tight. Her name was written on the front. Eleanor. Her breath caught in her throat. The handwriting was unmistakable. The same curved E, the same slanted L, Henry's handwriting. The handwriting of a man who had supposedly died in a car accident 41 years ago. Her pulse thudded as she opened the envelope. Inside was one sheet of paper. She unfolded it carefully. Eleanor, if you find this, it means you have lived years believing I am gone. But I am not dead. Not yet. I left because I discovered something I was never meant to know. My grandfather hid a treasure in Brazil, a treasure that holds more than riches. It holds danger. I have to find it before others do. I did not leave because I wanted to. I left because staying would put you in danger. If I survive, I will return. If I do not, then forgive me. Henry. The air thickened. Eleanor sat down on the edge of her bed, her fingers trembling with the paper still between them. The words blurred as her eyes filled with disbelief. She read them again. And again. As if repetition would force the truth to make sense. Her husband, the man she mourned, the man she buried, had not died at all. He had left her. He had lied. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. But the confusion spread like smoke. Memories of their marriage replayed in flashes, the tender mornings, his absent-minded humming, his stories about his Brazilian grandfather. She used to laugh at how obsessed he was with old family tales. Now she wondered what was truth and what was carefully woven fiction. She set the letter down. Something about it felt unfinished. Too simple. Too direct. Henry was never a man of simple explanations. He explained things thoroughly, sometimes too thoroughly, and yet here he offered only fragments. She noticed something in the corner of the page. Faint markings. Dates. 2 of them. One matched the night of his supposed death. But the other was written 2 years later. Her body went cold. Henry had been alive 2 years after the fake accident. Why had he written a second date? What happened in those missing 2 years? Where was he? Who was he running from? And why hide this from her? The questions grew heavy in her chest. That night, she did not sleep. The letter lay on the table illuminated by the warm glow of a single lamp. She sat in the dark, staring at his handwriting, her mind a tide of confusion and betrayal. By morning, curiosity had grown into something more powerful. A quiet desperation. A need she could not ignore. She began searching through old boxes, documents, and forgotten corners of the house. Every drawer, every file, every album. She hunted for clues she did not know how to find. In a box labeled miscellaneous, she found something else she had forgotten existed. A packet of newspaper clippings and family history notes Henry once kept for a genealogy project. She laughed softly at the memory. She had teased him about it, calling him an old man trapped in a young man's body. Inside the packet were newspaper scans mentioning Henry's grandfather, Alvaro Marston. Some articles were harmless, land ownership records, photographs from a 1923 community event. But others were more startling. One article mentioned a man named Alvaro suspected of involvement in illegal diamond trading during his youth in Brazil. Another spoke about a violent dispute between landowners after a legal conflict over mineral rights. Words like attack and disappearance stood out. Eleanor set the papers down, her mind tightening around a single terrifying realization. Henry's departure may not have been about treasure. It may have been about survival. It took her 3 days to absorb everything. The letter. The clippings. The second date. Her world, once still and predictable, now vibrated with hidden meaning. She felt watched, even though her house remained empty. She slept little. She ate less. She stared out her window, expecting something, someone, to appear. On the fourth night, her phone rang. She answered. Silence. Just breathing. Slow. Controlled. Not accidental. She hung up. The phone rang again the moment she placed it down. The same silence. The same breathing. She slammed the phone shut. That same night, she heard a noise outside her house. A crunch of gravel. A faint shift of shadow through the window. She stayed still, barely breathing. The next morning, she found footprints in the dirt near her porch. Larger than hers. Deep set. Someone had stood there for a while. She began to panic. But panic didn't stop her curiosity. It only sharpened it. She returned to the trunk. She checked every inch of it, every seam, every corner. She pressed the base again. Something clicked. A small piece of paper slid out from beneath the wood. A second hidden note. But this one wasn't gentle like the first. This one was short. The handwriting rushed. As if written while fleeing. If anyone finds me, they find you next. The note was unsigned, but she knew whose handwriting it was. Henry. A cold current ran through her, the kind that sinks into the bones. Someone had chased him. Someone might still be chasing. And now they believed she knew something. That night, she sat at her table and whispered the words she hadn't spoken in decades. Henry, what happened to you? She didn't expect an answer. But she needed one. And fate had its own timing. Because answers were already on their way. Moving toward her slowly, steadily, and closer than she realized. This was only the beginning. The night Eleanor discovered the hidden letter, she hardly slept. She kept replaying the last day she saw Thomas, the way he kissed her forehead before leaving for work, the way he laughed when she teased him about forgetting his lunch again. Back then, she believed she had lost him to a roadside accident. She believed every word the police said. But now, with the truth sitting inside a yellowing envelope, nothing made sense. The next morning, Eleanor laid the letter on the kitchen table as if it were a dangerous artifact. She kept staring at the handwriting she knew too well. Thomas had written it with urgency, as if he had been forced to hide it in a hurry. She noticed the uneven slant of the letters, the pressure marks on the paper, the subtle trembling in his signature. Something had scared him. Something big enough to make him disappear. Her mind filled with questions she had no one to ask. Why Brazil? Why treasure? Why leave her behind without a word? And most of all, why did someone hide the letter so well that she only found it 65 years later? Eleanor decided she needed answers. She packed the old attic box, the letter, and every photograph she had of Thomas into a bag. But when she tried calling the local precinct to ask about reopening the case, she was told the files were sealed 30 years ago. No further explanation. No access granted. That only deepened her curiosity. Later that week, a stranger knocked on her door, a man in his late 40s with a sharp posture and a voice too calm for a man who claimed to be a historian researching old disappearances. Eleanor noticed how his eyes wandered around her living room, searching, scanning, measuring. When she asked him what exactly he wanted, he said he was looking for any letters or documents Thomas might have left behind. She lied. She said she had nothing. He nodded, smiled politely, and walked back to his car. But Eleanor saw the way he paused on the porch, the way he looked over his shoulder as if he expected her to follow. She closed the door gently, locked it, and stepped aside to avoid the window's view. Her heart pounded because she understood now. Someone else was looking for what Thomas left behind. Someone who knew the letter existed long before she did. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. Every sound in her house seemed louder. Every shadow felt like it moved. At one point, when she stood near the window, she was certain she saw headlights parked far across the street that didn't belong to anyone on her block. Eleanor decided she couldn't stay quiet. She made an appointment with a private investigator named Walter Briggs, a retired cop known for taking unusual cases. When she handed him the letter, he read it twice, then leaned back, his brows pulled together. He told her Thomas's disappearance was more suspicious than she had been led to believe. There were inconsistencies in the original police report, missing timestamps, contradictory witness statements, and even a note from an officer who claimed Thomas had been seen boarding a plane days after he was declared dead. All of this was buried in sealed files. Walter warned her that reopening this case might drag her into something dangerous, something that had been hidden for decades. But Eleanor insisted. She had lived in confusion long enough. Over the next few weeks, the investigation revealed that Thomas had been researching something before he vanished. A name kept appearing in old documents, Rafael Moretti, a Brazilian explorer who disappeared with a rumored chest of gold and diamonds during the early 1900s. Thomas believed the treasure had not been lost. He believed his grandfather, a sailor who once traveled through South America, had found clues before dying mysteriously. Walter also discovered something else. The stranger who had visited Eleanor was connected to a private company known for recovering lost assets. They were known for aggressive tactics. They were not simply historians. As the truth unfolded, Eleanor felt both fear and something she hadn't felt in years, purpose. The pieces were slowly aligning, but too many questions remained. And beneath all her fear, there was a deeper ache, one she hardly allowed herself to feel. If Thomas had truly gone to Brazil searching for treasure, if he had truly left her behind to protect her, then what became of him? Was he hurt? Was he lost? Or was he still out there? Every discovery pulled her further in, but she didn't realize yet that the biggest truth, the one that would shatter everything, was still waiting for her. Eleanor woke the next morning with a plan she never imagined she would make at 70 years old. She was going to Brazil. Walter believed it was the only way to uncover the truth, and despite his concerns, he agreed to accompany her. He said she shouldn't travel alone, not when someone else was also searching for the same treasure, and certainly not when she was already being watched. Before leaving, Eleanor sat in her quiet kitchen for a long moment. The house that once bustled with laughter now felt too still. She touched her wedding ring, wondering if Thomas had done the same in whatever distant place he had vanished to. She whispered a promise to herself: she would not return without answers. The flight to Brazil felt unreal. Eleanor watched the clouds drift by and tried to imagine Thomas in the same sky 50 years earlier, driven by desperation and hope. She traced her fingers over the letter folded in her purse. The ink faded, but the words still sharp enough to cut into her heart. She wondered what he had felt the night he wrote it. Fear. Excitement. Guilt. When they landed in Manaus, the air hit her like a wall of heat and memory she had never lived. The city felt alive, noisy, unpredictable. Walter arranged a guide named João, a quiet man with sharp instincts and a reputation for navigating both the forest and the people who tried to control it. When Eleanor told him why she had come, he simply said that many men had come to Brazil searching for treasure, but only a few were prepared for what they found. For days, they followed the faint trail Thomas had left behind. Old journals uncovered by Walter, faded receipts from a hostel, a photograph taken by a street vendor showing Thomas standing near a ferry dock. Eleanor stared at that photograph for hours. Thomas looked younger than she remembered, alive, determined, almost haunted. It hurt to know he had been breathing somewhere in the world while she mourned him. On their fourth day of searching, they discovered something unsettling. João noticed a pair of men tailing them through the crowded market. They moved with purpose, not browsing, not buying, only watching. Walter confirmed they were the same men connected to the private company that had visited Eleanor's home weeks earlier. That night, they moved to a different hotel without using their names. Eleanor felt a tremor of fear settle inside her chest. It was the first time she questioned whether she had made the right decision. But the thought of returning home without the truth felt worse. The next morning, João guided them into the outskirts of the Amazon, where he believed Thomas had last been seen. The forest swallowed them into its massive green lungs. Eleanor found herself overwhelmed by the sounds, the heat, the sheer weight of life pressing in around her. She struggled physically, but her mind remained sharp, focused, hungry for any sign of her husband. Hours into the journey, João stopped suddenly. A rusted metal box lay half buried beneath a tree root, its edges eaten by time. Eleanor's breath caught as Walter knelt and pried it open. Inside were remnants of papers, too damaged to read, and a single object that made Eleanor's knees weaken. It was Thomas's pocket watch, the one she had given him on their wedding day, engraved with her initials and the words, "Come home to me." The forest seemed to hold its breath as she touched it. The metal was cold, but she imagined it warm from his hand. She fought back tears, not because it confirmed he had been here, but because it didn't confirm why he never came back. Before they could say anything else, a branch cracked behind them. Walter raised a hand for silence. João motioned for Eleanor to stay low. In the thick brush, shadows shifted. Someone was there. Someone following them. They moved deeper into the forest, their steps careful, their senses stretched thin. Every tree trunk seemed to hide a threat. When they finally stopped to rest, João revealed that the men trailing them had been in the area for months. Locals whispered they were searching for the same lost treasure and that they were willing to eliminate anyone who got too close. Eleanor suddenly realized something chilling. If those men had been in Brazil all this time, then they might have crossed paths with Thomas. They might have threatened him. They might have been the reason he disappeared forever. That night, while they camped under the dense canopy, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She kept her eyes open, listening to the forest breathe. Every sound made her tense. She clutched the pocket watch so tightly her hand ached. In the darkness, she whispered to Thomas, promising him she was close, closer than she had ever been. But she didn't know the greatest truth of all. She didn't know that the forest wasn't just holding memories of him. It was holding him. Alive. And she was walking straight toward the part of the story that would break everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the man she thought she had lost forever. The morning felt heavier than the night before, as if the forest itself had decided to test Eleanor's resolve. João led the way through a narrowed path, warning them that beyond this point lay abandoned trails once used by explorers who never returned. Walter stayed close to Eleanor, watching the trees for movement, listening for the faintest sound out of place. After hours of walking, João raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Ahead stood the ruins of an old wooden cabin, nearly swallowed by vines and moss. The walls sagged, the roof slanted, but the structure remained intact enough to suggest someone had lived there. Recently. Eleanor's heartbeat became a drum inside her chest. She could feel something in the air, a pull she couldn't explain. As they approached, Walter gently pushed the creaking door open. Inside, the room was small, lit by a window carved into the wood. Maps were pinned to the walls, circles drawn in red ink. A table held stacks of notebooks, a lantern, and a rusted compass. But what stopped Eleanor cold was the photograph lying in the center of the table. A recent one. A photograph of her, taken in her front yard back in the United States. Her breath caught. Walter's face tightened. João quietly closed the door behind them. Someone had been watching her. Someone who lived here. Someone who knew she was coming. Walter picked up one of the journals and flipped through it. The handwriting shifted between neat and frantic. Pages mentioned failed searches, warnings of dangerous men, and something else repeated over and over: she cannot know. Eleanor reached for another journal, her hands trembling. When she flipped it open, her breath stopped. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Thomas's. Her knees weakened, and she leaned against the table for support. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the truth she had hoped for yet feared. Thomas had been alive. Thomas had been here. And he had been watching her from a distance, writing about her, protecting her, hiding from her. Before she could speak, the air outside shifted. Leaves rustled. João stiffened and moved to the window. He whispered that the men from the private company were close. Very close. They had followed them into the forest and were surrounding the ruins from both sides. There was no time to run. Walter quickly pulled Eleanor behind a fallen beam while João positioned himself near the door, ready if anyone forced their way in. The forest became silent, unnaturally silent, as if waiting. Then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. The door creaked again, this time from the outside. João raised his hand, prepared to strike, but paused when the door opened only halfway and a familiar voice broke through the stillness. It was older, rougher, deeper, but it was unmistakably him. Eleanor gasped before she even saw his face. Thomas stepped inside. He was thinner, his hair completely white, his skin weathered by decades of sun and hardship. But his eyes were the same. The same blue that once made her feel safe. The same eyes she had mourned for 50 years. The moment he saw her, he stopped breathing, as if the world had ripped open in front of him. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't speak. Her mind couldn't catch up with the sight before her. Finally, Thomas whispered her name, a sound cracked with disbelief and longing. He stepped closer, but Walter blocked him, demanding answers. João warned that the other men were closing in. Thomas raised his hands and said he had been hiding from those men for years. They were after the treasure, and he had discovered its location. But once he did, he realized the truth: it wasn't gold or diamonds. It was something far more powerful. Documents that proved land ownership worth billions, stolen generations ago. Whoever controlled those papers controlled an empire. Thomas said he never meant to leave Eleanor. He never meant to stay away. He left because he feared they would come after her if they knew he was searching. When he found out she had discovered the letter, he knew she would come looking for him, and he began following her journey from a distance to make sure she stayed alive. Before he could say more, gunshots cracked through the silence. The walls splintered. The men were here. João pushed the table against the door while Walter pulled Eleanor toward a back exit she hadn't noticed. Thomas took her hand for the first time in 50 years, gripping it tightly, refusing to let go. They ran through the forest, dodging roots and branches, shots echoing behind them. Thomas struggled but stayed ahead, driven by a force stronger than fear. When they reached a riverbank, they hid behind the rocks while João led a counter-out to throw the men off. Eleanor finally looked at Thomas, really looked at him. He was older. He was worn. But he was alive. And he had waited for her in the only way he knew. Thomas told her he had hidden the documents in a place only they could reach. A place tied to their past. A place he knew she would remember. The journey back to the United States took days, and for Eleanor, every hour felt like walking through a lifetime she had already lived once. She sat beside Thomas on the plane, studying the lines on his face, the quietness in his expression, the weight of all he had carried alone. He rarely looked away from her, as if afraid she might disappear again if he blinked. When they landed, Walter arranged a safe location for them to stay. The men chasing them were still out there, desperate to reclaim the documents Thomas had hidden decades ago. But Thomas insisted they couldn't hide for long. He said the only way to end it was to reveal the truth publicly, to expose the theft and the cover-up that had cost him 50 years of his life. Before any of that, they had one place to go. The old house where Eleanor still lived. The home where Thomas once lived too. The home where they planted their anniversary tree. Eleanor felt herself trembling as they approached the yard. The oak had grown wide and strong over decades, its roots deep, its branches stretching over the fence like arms welcoming them back. Thomas walked toward it slowly, almost reverently, touching the bark as if it were a living memory. He knelt and found the spot where two roots curved into a hollow. He reached inside and pulled out a weathered metal tube. Eleanor felt her breath catch. He had hidden it there before he left, believing he would return within weeks. Instead, it had waited half a century. Thomas opened the tube with shaking hands. Inside were documents sealed in protective sleeves, land deeds, old contracts, maps, and signed papers proving that Thomas's grandfather had been cheated out of ownership of land now worth billions. Those responsible had buried the truth and hunted down anyone who got close. Eleanor touched his arm, trying to steady him. But Thomas wasn't looking at the documents anymore. His eyes had shifted toward the house. Toward the porch. Someone was standing there. The man from the private company. The same one who came to her house weeks ago pretending to be a historian. Walter reached for his phone. João stepped forward, ready to intercept. But the man raised his hands calmly and said he came alone. He said he didn't want the documents. He wanted Thomas. Eleanor moved closer to Thomas, but the man continued speaking in a quiet, unsettling tone. He revealed that Thomas's disappearance had never been random. Thomas hadn't simply left in search of treasure. He had been taken. Forced into working with them to decode the clues left by his grandfather. When Thomas tried to escape, they staged his death and made Eleanor believe he was gone forever. The only reason he was still alive was because he knew more than anyone else. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her. She stared at Thomas, waiting for him to deny it, but instead he lowered his head. He confessed that everything the man said was true. He told her he had escaped years later, but by then the danger to her was too great. He stayed hidden to keep her safe. He watched her from afar, refusing to pull her into the darkness he had been trapped in. He only came out of hiding when he learned the men had grown desperate enough to follow her. The truth cut deeper than she expected. Thomas had not just been lost. He had been forced to disappear. Eleanor stepped back, letting the confusion settle in her chest like a deep ache. Thomas reached for her, but she couldn't move. She needed a moment to breathe, to understand. The man on the porch then said something that twisted the story even further. He told Eleanor that Thomas had not been the only one involved. Someone else had helped the company decades ago. Someone who betrayed Thomas's grandfather long before Thomas was born. Someone who lived in this very town. Someone in Eleanor's family. Eleanor froze. Her mind searched every memory, every relative, every conversation from her past. She asked the man for a name, but he only said the truth was inside the documents Thomas had protected. A single signature. One Eleanor had never noticed before. Walter flipped through the pages until he found it. A signature dated over 70 years earlier. A signature belonging to Eleanor's father. The world seemed to stop. Her father, the man who raised her with kindness, had been part of the conspiracy to steal the land. He had lied, covered his tracks, and played a role in the tragedy that destroyed Thomas's life. The realization struck her like a blow she couldn't deflect. Eleanor felt tears she didn't expect rising in her eyes. Thomas stepped closer, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. He told her he had learned the truth years ago but never told her, because he knew it would break her heart. The man on the porch stepped back and warned that more men were coming. A decision had to be made. Eleanor could either hand over the documents and lose everything, or she could expose the truth and risk becoming the center of a storm that would shake powerful people to their core. She looked at Thomas. He looked at her. Years of love, years of pain, years stolen from them for reasons neither deserved. Eleanor took the documents and walked inside the house. Walter followed her with his laptop. Thomas waited at the door, watching her with the fear of a man who had already lost her once. Eleanor opened the documents one by one. Then she made her choice. She told Walter to upload everything. Every file, every page, every signature. She told him to send it to news networks, government watchdogs, public forums, anyone who could not be silenced. Walter did it. Within minutes, the truth began spreading across the world. Outside, the men who had chased them for weeks began backing away, knowing the documents were already public. The power they wanted was gone. The secret they protected was exposed. By nightfall, the danger had faded. The house was quiet again. Thomas sat beside Eleanor on the porch. He told her he never expected forgiveness, not after everything she had endured. But Eleanor took his hand. She said forgiveness was not what she needed. What she needed was time. Time to understand the 50 years they lost. Time to rebuild what was taken. Time to learn who they could become at 70. Thomas nodded, grateful for even a chance. As the sun set behind their anniversary tree, Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. They had lived through lies, loss, danger, and truths that shattered everything they knew. But they were alive. They were together. And they had something neither of them expected. A second beginning. One no one else could take away.